Hello and welcome to this video on the truth of the magic school bus, a vehicle of constant child endangerment, possibly death, and certainly trauma. If the magic school bus was even close to reality, Ms Frizzle would be in jail by now for the death of many children, grievous bodily harm and trauma to those children that may, but is very unlikely, to have survived the experience she puts them through. That is, in reality, she'd be living in a cardboard box at an underpass while claiming she's a teacher going on a magical trip in space. Or at least until the police sent her for a psych eval, likely against her will. Ms Frizzle is considered the eccentric teacher from the magic school bus. Eccentric is a very nice way of saying that she appears to be undergoing several psychotic breaks. She leads her students on wild, educational adventures using a magical shape-shifting school bus. The show is meant to be lighthearted and focused on science education and rather fantastical scenarios. But these do place the characters in a situation that, in a more realistic context, should be extremely dangerous and more than likely fatal in many cases. So, the Magic School Bus ran from 1994 to 1997. There are 4 seasons with 52 episodes, and a number of these could have led to catastrophic outcomes for the students and anyone else on board, more so when you consider the actual scientific and physical implications of the adventure. While by no means the most comprehensive overview, this is a reasonably organised analysis based on the types of scenarios, and we're mostly avoiding the speculative fanfiction or non-canonical content. Officially, no student has died on board, which is either really good cover-up, PR, or incredible luck. Even with that being the case, there are still serious risks in many of the scenarios shown. Let's start with the idea of shrinkage. Time travel, space exploration, biological transformations, and extreme environmental exposure. The bus's magical powers are supposed to mitigate dangers, but if we ignore plot armour because plot armour is bullshit, the students and even Ms Frizzle, her lizard, or others face notable risks of physical trauma, environmental hazards, biological alteration, and equipment failure. And any one of these, let alone multiple, could kill. So this is never a fun place to be. One is shrinking and microscopy. Ms Frizzle frequently shrinks the school bus and its occupants to explore microscopic or small-scale environments, human bodies, insect habitats, or cellular structures. These are all scenarios that sound like they're great, except they run the risk of things like crushing, suffocation, and biological attack. In the episode for lunch, Season 1, Episode 2, the class shrinks down to explore Arnold's digestive system. This obviously involves the first issue of crushing or drowning, being chewed or swallowed. That is the process of digestion, at least initially. You will chew with your teeth and mouth. Then, the esophagus will contract to push food down into your stomach. By the time you get to the stomach, not only do you now have the mechanical crushing force of the stomach churning you as a digestive thing, but stomach acid. Stomach acid has a pH of between 1 and 3. Exact numbers vary by individuals, but in short, it would melt the bus and the people in it. Obviously, magical protection and plot armor bullshit. And then we have suffocation. There is practically no oxygen in the digestive tract. And of course, this means you suffocate to death, and while we'll be the first to admit that it's a cool idea to be able to see the digestive tract directly, suffocating to death in the digestive tract, not so cool. And more so if you get trapped in the mucus, which would not only lead to asphyxiation, but possibly drowning. And then we have the immune system attacking the body. Not the body as in the host body, but the individuals. White blood cells, and particularly monocytes in the digestive tract, would recognize anything foreign and go, that's not part of the body, it needs to be destroyed, which would lead to phagocytosis, and in other cases cytokine storms. That would ultimately destroy the body. Then we have Inside Ralphie, Season 1, Episode 3, where they explore Ralphie's bloodstream, which, again, is a big problem, drowning, suffocation, and pressure. The idea is to learn about the immune system, clotting and or embolisms. The tiny students would inevitably be trapped in blood clots, or they would even cause embolisms, killing the person's body they're exploring. This would happen by virtue of blocking vital blood flow to organs like the heart or brain. Then there is the high-velocity impacts. The blood flows in arteries at a speed of up to 40 centimeters a second. This is somewhere in the ballpark of 16 inches or roughly 1 1/3 feet per second. that would slam the bus or the students into blood vessels, and for that matter valves or anything else, with significant force for their size. Best case scenario, trauma. Worst case scenario, death. Well, arguably worst case scenario is still drowning inside someone's arteries, but that's not the point. Get Ants in the Pants, or Season 2 Episode 11, has the class shrinking down to ant size to explore an ant colony. Now, ants can be very territorial, and so predation or crushing from ants attacking the students, because they're intruders, is quite reasonable. In fact, it's basically Florida and Texas levels of castle doctrine protection. You get near their home, you start a war, and the ants are plentiful. They would use their mandibles, or even in some cases, formic acid spray, to either crush or melt the students. And if there's anything bigger in the environment, the bus would be crushed. Or if the soil in a tunnel collapses, that would crush the bus. Anything could happen that would kill them all. And even further along the lines of oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, we have oxygen deprivation. The small-scale oxygen diffusion issues would cause hypoxia in any shrunken body. Essentially, the surface area to volume ratios change creates a shit show for the kids in the bus, leading to their inevitable death. Then we have the more general risks of shrinking. It violates the square cube law. This creates huge metabolic issues, and arguably metabolic collapse due to insufficient oxygen and heat dissipation. Then we have equipment failures, the bus's shrinking mechanism malfunctioning. It could just as easily trap students at a microscopic size, or, if they resize in the wrong place at the wrong time, crush them, or, if they're really unlucky, cause whatever they're trying to explore, especially if it's a person, to basically explode as the small things inside of them resize and their body can't cope with the resizing, although there's a good chance that the individuals in the bus would also be crushed. So everybody dies there. And exposure to pathogens or toxins in any biological system they're exploring. Bacteria from the mouth or the GI tract, various pathogens such as mold inside of ant nests. The cordyceps would be fun in that case, and anything else that would overwhelm unprotected students. Shifting to more, let's say, obvious issues, we have space and planetary exploration. Ms Frizzle has taken the class into outer space multiple times. This will expose them to the vacuum of space, radiation, and extreme gravitational forces. The episode Get Lost in Space, Season 1, Episode 1, has the class touring the solar system. This invariably leads them to exposure to the cold hard vacuum of space. If there was no magical plot armor protection, exposure to space's vacuum would cause rapid decompression, lung rupture, and death within 15 to 30 seconds due to hypoxia, although, strictly speaking, death would occur about 4 minutes later, but that's only if they hold their breath and their brains eventually melt. Well, fail, but still. And then you have radiation from the solar system, particularly the sun, and the more general background cosmic radiation. They would get 1 to 2 millisieverts a day in interplanetary space, which would basically cause acute radiation syndrome and longer-term cancer, which does raise some concerns about the school's liability for all the students who have now been in space. And, well, impact risks again. Things travel fast in space because there's almost no resistance to speak of, and any collision with a micrometeoroid, which would be traveling at somewhere in the range of 10 to 70 kilometers a second, which is somewhere between 16 and roughly 6 and 40 miles a second, would puncture the bus. This would lead to not just explosive decompression, but should any student happen to be in the way of that meteorite when it happens to hit, that student won't be there anymore. That student won't be anywhere anymore. They will have been turned into, at best, mush spread across the bus, and, at worst, basically vaporized. Then we have Out of This World, Season 2, Episode 2, where the class tries to intercept an asteroid. This is a very dumb decision, because that's a collision. A high-speed collision with an asteroid or any kind of debris in space would vaporize the bus and the occupants. The same way that same sort of micrometeorite hitting the bus would vaporize a student. And then we have the thermal extremes. The proximity to a sun or planetary surface, such as Mercury, would incinerate everybody on board. Mercury has a temperature of 427 degrees Celsius, on its surface at least. You can burn things at roughly 150 degrees Celsius in terms of, say, meat, which the human body basically is a meat bag surrounding a whole bunch of water. Season 3, Episode 3, Taking Flight, has the bus turning into a space shuttle-like vehicle. This brings in re-entry hazards. Improper atmospheric re-entry would cause the bus to burn up. Temperatures get up to 1,650 degrees Celsius, and G-forces get somewhere between 3 and 8 during re-entry. That's 3 to 8 times normal gravity, and there is zero protection for the occupants, leading to being pancaked. Not the cool kind of pancake, the kind where you don't come back. So there are general risks. Again, malfunction of the bus's life support systems, oxygen, temperature control, and so on would all lead to either suffocation or thermal death. Neither of these are considered fun ways to go. Gravitational stresses from rapid transition, for example going from Earth to Jupiter, Earth has, Earth's gravity, which is 1, and Jupiter's 2.5 times that. This would cause organ failure and cardiovascular collapse. And then we have prolonged space exposure without adequate shielding. This will result in lethal radiation doses. At least one civet in a single trip is enough to be fatal, and oftentimes these trips can be up to twice that. If they don't die from the radiation exposure directly, they will die from the inevitable and very obvious cancer that will develop very soon thereafter. Then we have the extreme environmental adventures, because it's not enough to kill students 2 ways, now it has to be 3. Ms Frizzle has exposed the class to extreme terrestrial environments like deserts, oceans, and the Arctic, without any kind of realistic protective gear. In the Arctic, or Season 3, Episode 7, has the class exploring the Arctic tundra. The Arctic tundra, a place that has famously killed many people trying to explore it, and yet we still sent more because humanity just doesn't learn its lessons very well. The students should have experienced what those same Arctic explorers did, hypothermia. Arctic temperatures are negative 40 degrees Celsius, and sometimes lower again, would cause frostbite or hypothermia within minutes. That assumes no proper insulation, which obviously they don't. They appear to be wearing, for all intents and purposes, their regular school clothes. Then we have starvation and dehydration. The limited food and water in survival scenarios would invariably lead to organ failure within days at best, and depending on the exact scenario and the environmental conditions, possibly sooner. As the class near a volcanic vent. These are always fun because these are massively high pressure environments, crushing high pressure environments, not like, say, exam time crunch or being in a high-end, stock market or investment firm kind of crushing pressure. We mean actual crushing pressure. Deep sea pressures are 400 atmospheres at 4,000 meters. This would crush the bus and occupants without the magical plot armor, and it would do so fairly quickly. It's, for all intents and purposes, what happened to the guys exploring the Titanic, except even sooner and even more unpleasant because it's a bunch of school kids. The school kids are a pain. They don't deserve crushed in the ocean as punishment for being a pain. If they don't die from that, and they somehow miraculously survive, welcome to burns territory. Thermal burns, due to proximity to the thermal vents at roughly 400 degrees Celsius, would boil the students alive. Toxic exposure then follows if they still manage to somehow not die, and they probably wish they had at that point, due to the volcanic gases like hydrogen and sulfide. This would cause poisoning if it doesn't cause asphyxiation, and you really have to hope for asphyxiation, because that would kill you sooner and would stop your suffering after being crushed, burnt, and poisoned. Episode 10 from Season 3, in the rainforest, has the class exploring a jungle, unsurprisingly, and this is where they encounter predators. Sure, humans are considered spacewalks. We're not that good yet that we can survive encounters with random predators like jaguars, or venomous creatures, snakes, spiders, etc. All of these should have resulted in some sort of fatal attack, or being envenomed. And then of course we have tropical diseases. Infections are going to be the obvious concern here. Malaria, dengue, yellow fever. There are all sorts of diseases that should have infected the students because they're unprotected, except magical plot armor. So we already have a whole bunch of general risks. Extreme weather, such as storms and heat waves, would cause heat stroke, dehydration or physical trauma. Lack of proper equipment, oxygen tanks for diving, cold weather gear, and all of these heightening exposure risks, and the bus's transformations into a submarine and more, failing, causing students to die in a hostile environment, on top of the direct and literal risks of the environment itself. So Ms Frizzle really shouldn't have a teaching license anymore, yet we keep on going. The fourth possible way is the biological and physical transformations Ms Frizzle occasionally transforms the students and the bus into animals, objects, or other forms. This poses a risk of permanent alteration and sometimes physical harm. Season 2, Episode 5, Butterfly and the Bog Beast, has the class transforming into butterflies. This is not a very smart decision. Butterflies, depending on the species, can survive anywhere from a couple of days through to a few weeks, maybe a few months. They also get predated upon. As insects, the students could and probably should have been eaten by birds, spiders, and various other predators. The insect bodies themselves are incredibly delicate, and any kind of physical trauma, such as from the wind or rain, should crush them, causing serious problems. And of course we have the ongoing concern of transformation failure. If the bus's transformation mechanism failed, students might well remain insects, not just unable to survive long term because they have no idea what's going on and how to deal with it, but because the actual species they now are does not live very long. Season 1 Episode 5, Hops Home, has the student becoming frogs to explore a pond. Frogs are prey for all sorts of critters, snakes, birds, fish, all sorts of things that would risk them being attacked, and, well, this is obviously not great. And of course there's the environmental stress. Dehydration or temperature fluctuations can kill amphibian bodies very quickly, very easily. For example, if you spent any time on the bus, which is dry, as a frog, you may not come back from that field trip. Season 2 Episode 3, The Busosaurus, has the class travelling back to the Cretaceous period and interacting with dinosaurs, as though they didn't learn anything from Jurassic Park. Obviously, we have physical attack from dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus rex, which would crush or eat students. Again, life finds a way, and when life finds a way, your entire park and school get shut down and you lose your teaching license. There's also the question of the time paradox. Altering the past could disrupt the timeline, which would potentially erase the student's existence, which is probably not a consideration that really came up during the examination of this. Of course, all of these have more general risks, transformation errors again leading to incomplete or unstable biological forms, causing cellular collapse, organ failure, or becoming a furry. Psychological trauma from becoming a non-human entity, which could destabilize mental health and lead to them becoming a vegan, and exposure to prehistoric or even alien environments could introduce unknown pathogens or toxins. We don't have a comparison for that. Next, we have the idea of mechanical and technological risks. You would think that they would have learnt their lesson after 4 problems, but no, we can keep going. The bus's transformation and gadgets are central to the adventures of the entire series, but they are very complex and frequent malfunctions are a problem. More so when it seems that the teacher themselves, Ms Frizzle, has no clue as to how to fix them, meaning the students are forced to resolve these problems. Season 2 Episode 8, Revving Up, has the class exploring the bus's engine. This is not a good place to be, beyond the fact that there's a whole bunch of fuel in there, and fuel is a common cause of cancer. You also have the crushing pressure of pistons and everything else. A mechanical failure in this case means the engine might well explode, catch fire, and possibly incinerate not just the students inside the engine, but anyone still in the bus. Toxic exposure, engine fluids, exhaust, anything else, could easily poison the students. Carbon monoxide is a particularly noteworthy example there. Gets a Bright Idea, or Season 3 Episode 9, has the class manipulating light and electricity. Letting any student near any decent-sized power source when it comes to electricity is a good way to get, well, not just fired, but charged with a best-case scenario manslaughter, most likely murder, for electrocution. Mishandling electrical systems will deliver lethal shocks. 100 milliamps across the heart is enough to kill, and of course if it doesn't kill, it burns. Lots and lots of burns because high-intensity light, lasers, and even electricity in this case, can cause severe burns or blindness. Makes It Stink, Season 4 Episode 11, has the class exploring a chemical reaction. Oh boy. Chemical burns and poisoning are the obvious thing to jump to here because exposure to reactive chemicals, acids and bases for example, could and frankly will cause damage or systemic poisoning. There are more, let's say, general risks again. The bus's frequent malfunctions are a concern. Shrinking errors, navigation failures, and actual mechanical failures meaning you'll be stranded in a lethal environment, best case scenario, and somewhere where you don't have any chance in hell of getting home again, and you can't really survive in that environment, which isn't lethal, but, well, a lack of food, water, shelter, and other basic human requirements. There is a lack of safety protocols across the board, no helmets, harnesses, and, especially during high-speed or high-risk maneuvers, a notable increase in risk of injury, and of course, the reliance and arguably over-reliance on untested technology will inevitably lead to catastrophic failures, especially if we're talking about extreme environments. And next we have time travel and temporal risks. Time travel is always sketchy, not just because, well, you make one small change and suddenly the future is made up of apes that speak and humans are enslaved, or alternatively, you become your own grandfather. But there are unique dangers related to altering any kind of historical event or being exposed to past environments. The Bustosaurus Season 2 Episode 3 has them travel into the Cretaceous period. This would create temporal disruptions interfering with prehistoric events. This would cause paradoxes, and potentially erase the students from existence. There is also the problem of bringing modern pathogens and other microbial organisms to the past, and vice versa, meaning that you may be introducing particularly nasty pathogens from the Cretaceous period into the current human population, or basically doing smallpox blankets just to dinosaurs. There's also a certain environmental hazard that needs to be considered. First of all, volcanic activity. This is basically lava flows, heat, and of course CO2 being released. Other concerns include low oxygen levels. The Mesozoic has about 10 to 15% oxygen versus 21% today, which is another consideration because, again, suffocation. And of course we have the extreme climates, which would and definitely are lethal to the students. It flexes its muscles, or Season 2 Episode 6 has the class exploring historical technology. Again, we need to look at things like equipment failure. A primitive or unstable technology could and probably would at some point collapse or explode, causing injury. And of course, disease exposure. Past environments did harbour various pathogens, some of them are ancient, some of them are very modern, and the human body has no immunity to them. The general risks are fairly standard, which is time travel could cause physical stress, again relativistic effects or temporal shear, and potentially disintegrate the body. That's one we don't have a cure for, or any other fix. It's basically, you need to create a paradox by going back and stopping the event in the first place, thereby preventing the need for the stopping of the event, thereby creating the event. Yeah, it doesn't work. Or getting stuck in the past without any resources, leading to starvation, predation, and exposure, ultimately culminating in death. Now, why does no one actually die? Well, the Magic School Bus is meant to be a children's show, and Ms Frizzle's magical bus is meant to ensure safety through plot-convenient mechanisms, otherwise known as plot armour. Its invulnerability, perfect light support, and instant transformations mean that everybody survives, when no one should. Realistically, the show does prioritize education over realism, so yeah, dangers are downplayed, or occasionally resolved by the episode's end, but well, to be blunt, Ms Frizzle's competence as a teacher, and certainly the bus's advanced technology, despite occasional glitches, seem to always save the day, but we would argue that Ms Frizzle's cavalier attitude towards danger, encountering risky exploration without visible safety measures, for example, could be seen as reckless, and definitely is reckless in a real-world context. And no matter how you frame her actions as educational, or fostering curiosity, problem-solving, or anything else, the show's tone basically downplays that there's any real threat, and there's definitely threat, as we've described. In fact, we're not going to say threat, we're going to say that this is a serial killer teacher. They should have killed everybody multiple times over. Of course, this is based only on the original 1990s series. There is a reboot from 2017 through to 2020, but we feel like the first 52 episodes are more than good enough to give you a solid idea as to why it is that Ms Frizzle and the Magic School Bus is a less Magic School Bus and more Magical Coffin. So yes, Ms Frizzle's field trips expose her students to scenarios that, arguably without magical plot armor, could and should have resulted in death via crushing, suffocation, radiation, predation, thermal extremes, chemical exposure, temporal disruptions, and more. The key episodes really do highlight why the high-risk nature of the adventures really aren't just high risk, they are high lethality. And yes, we know the show's educational intent and magical safeguards ensure safety. There's a certain realistic lens that needs to be applied, and, well, Ms Frizzle's methods are extraordinarily hazardous, and deadly. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, and please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.